Welcome, Earthlings. Thank you for joining us at this town hall. Our goal today is to share with you a vision of a systemic solution to the climate emergency. The strategy we propose can turn the tide for all of humanity in one generation. It's something we can actually do and something that can make a tremendous difference. My name is Marek Ozjewicz. I'm Polish-American. I'm a parent. I'm professor of literacy at the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, and I'm director of the Center for Climate Literacy. We are the first academic unit in the world dedicated to universal climate literacy education. By the end of today's session, I hope to convince you that we're also unique in our approach, methods, and impact.
My name is Nick Cleese. I'm an Iowa farm kid, a first-generation college student, a former high school English teacher, and currently a lecturer in first-year writing in the Department of Writing, and the Director of Community Engagement at the Center for Climate Literacy at the University of Minnesota. I'm delighted to be here with you today. Our schedule for this town hall is as follows. First, we'll introduce our work, our vision, our goals, and explain how it can make a difference. Then we'll show you an example of climate literacy in action. Then we'll tell you about what we've accomplished so far, about our needs, our goals, and how you can help make them happen. In the meantime, you can ask any questions you have of us by emailing us directly at climatelit@umn.edu, and we'll end by addressing any questions that we have time for. In the meantime, you can also access these slides and other resources, like a visual annotated bibliography of the sources we mentioned in this slideshow, by scanning the QR code with your smart device's camera or by visiting the URL listed here. You'll also receive these resources in a follow-up email. Please note that this town hall is being recorded, but only Marek and I will be visible on screen. We'll also post this recording on the center's website. You can enable closed captions by clicking the CC button on the bottom toolbar. And thank you again for being here. Now I'll hand it back over to Marek.
So I want to start by telling you who we are and why this work matters. The Center for Climate Literacy was founded in May 2022, building on years of grassroots work. We are the first academic center in the world dedicated to developing research, training, and design solutions for climate literacy education in K-12 classrooms. Our goal is to transform education from within so that it becomes an unstoppable force to bring about an ecological civilization. Now, imagine the world in which you want to live. Imagine a world where you and your children are able to live meaningful, fulfilling lives without harming the planet. Imagine we are not implicated in Earth-destroying lifestyles, as is the case today. Imagine we live in harmony with the flows that support all life, bugs, birds, plants, everything as our kin, fellow Earthlings. Imagine a world where all systemic drivers of the climate emergency, from wealth inequality to industrial pollution and global warming, are confronted and eliminated. If you can imagine this world, you'll realize that it will never happen unless we change the way we think and act, unless we change what we value and how. We are a climate illiterate civilization, and we have sleepwalked into a disaster. It's time to wake up. It's time to build universal climate literacy, and it's time for education that will help us create a just, sustainable, ecological civilization that we all want to see. This is our mission. Our work rests on 2 premises and 3 commitments. The premises include a recognition of where we are and a vision of where we're going. The recognition part is what you already know. We are waging a war against the planet, and we're winning. All main systems of our civilization, our politics, industries, law, finance, agriculture, media, everything was created without concern for the biosphere. We are tearing apart the web of life that supports us. We're destroying our home like we have no other choice, except we do. Here is where a vision of where we're going our second premise comes in. We believe that a different future is possible. We have the ability to transition to an ecological civilization, a world where humans thrive alongside animals and plants, where the air is clean, the ocean has fish, no plastic, and the Earth's web of life is strong, supporting us and the non-human life too. We believe that education is key to accelerate this transformation, and thus our three commitments, which you can see represented in the slide in the middle. Our first commitment is a commitment to climate literacy. We believe that in order to transition to an ecological civilization, we need to achieve universal climate literacy. Climate literacy is an understanding that includes numbers and facts, such as climate science, but it centers on developing values, attitudes, and behavioral change aligned with how we should live to build sustainable futures. Our second commitment is a commitment to education. We believe that teaching about climate change should be at the heart of our educational practice. Climate literacy can be scaffolded. It must be taught to all K-12 students and across all subject areas. Our third commitment is a commitment to stories. We believe that stories for young audiences are ground zero for building universal climate literacy. Literature, film, games, and art for young people are not additional. They are the most important avenues for raising climate awareness and mobilizing action. And of course, there are dozens of climate action, youth action, environmental and sustainability education organizations out there with whom we share these core premises, especially about the urgency to act and about the window of opportunity we now have. That said, we are unique in at least three ways. One, we are the first organization in the world to promote a holistic understanding of climate literacy. Building on cutting-edge research, we know that learning climate science is not enough. Climate literacy is a wider competence that connects scientific knowledge with emotional knowledge, with values and attitudes. Two, we are the first organization of disciplinary experts in education. The vast majority of other organizations are generalists, outsiders to education. We are insiders. We are disciplinary experts. We train teachers. We create literacy research. We know what happens in actual classrooms. Our approach reflects the most recent trend away from activism as an after-work commitment and toward climate action in your workplace. One great example is Project Drawdown's Job Action Guides. What they propose for finance, government relations, and other corporate job types, we envision for the teaching profession. Three, we are also unique in our methods and tool set. Cognitive research shows that human brains think in stories. These stories shape the reality we create. For example, we have been telling ourselves how we are separate from nature and above nature. And so we have created a world in which nature is an inert, expendable resource. Imagine a world we can create if we start telling stories about how we are nature and part of a larger symphony of life. Story is the operating system of the human brain. It's the primary tool for thinking, acting, and feeling. Learning with stories is essential to help us imagine a transition to an ecological civilization. Also, it makes climate literacy available to any human being from the age of 2 and up. So bringing these 3 points together, here is what we propose. We have a window of opportunity to turn this around this decade. Imagine all children learn climate literacy, even in kindergarten, developing vocabulary, understanding, values, and capacity for action. Imagine all teachers are trained and supported to incorporate climate literacy in any subject area they teach. Imagine all schools becoming hubs for climate literacy learning and initiatives that transform their neighborhoods and communities. This is how we imagine systemic change. Since 2018, IPCC has urged for rapid, unprecedented, and far-reaching systems transition. And our vision is to do just that in a massive system of our civilization called education. In the US alone, we have over 48 million students and about 5 million teachers in K through 12 classrooms. Imagine we reach even 1 or 2% of this group, and we're talking about millions. These millions will swell into a force not unlike the civil rights movement, demanding real change now. We have the team and expertise to do it. We're one of the best colleges of education in the world. Our team includes teacher educators and scholars across the nation and across the world, connected to schools, teachers, and districts everywhere. We have the power to change education from within by creative grassroots action without waiting for requirements to trickle down from school boards, education departments, state, or federal regulators. Our vision is to develop climate literacy resources for all grades, all subject areas, all schools. We will train teachers. These teachers will train other teachers. We will build networks of educators to share tips and take ownership of this work in their classrooms and in their communities.
We feel the urgency of this work. We've already started to do what we can. We're proud of what we've achieved in less than just a year, and I want to share with you just a few highlights. Our core project is an online resource hub called Climate Lit, which was officially launched in 2021. Designed for educators, Climate Lit is a large, searchable, dynamic compendium of book reviews, glossary terms, and other content that teachers can take and adapt for their own lessons in their own classrooms. And unlike other educational resource sites, all content published on Climate Lit is double peer-reviewed by both scholars and educators. Climate Lit contributors include educators from over 20 countries, and we are expanding this team to add resources from across the globe and in languages other than English. Last June, we hosted our very first Schools for the Planet Summer Institute for Educators, a collaboration with the Center for Global Studies here on the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus. This collaboration allowed us to provide over 24 teachers a 4-day intensive workshop on implementing climate literacy education in their specific classrooms. These folks earned 18 continuing education credits, which they need to maintain their teaching licenses, and they developed curriculum for their classrooms. And maybe best of all, they got all of this for free. We also created an open access journal for teachers called Climate Literacy in Education, or CLE. CLE is a peer-reviewed pocket journal for short, teacher-oriented content managed by a 12-person international editorial collective. Teachers are busy folks, I know that firsthand. And we want to make sure that teachers can access the content we offer, which includes scholarly analysis of texts, teacher reflections, creative works, and curriculum. The first issue came out in January, and to date, we've had over 2,000 views. This year also marks our inaugural Climate Literacy Teacher Leader Fellowship. We're working with 5 teachers from the Twin Cities metro area, 2 teachers from STEM, 1 from English, 1 from Chinese, and 1 from math over the course of an entire academic year. We meet bi-weekly to discuss readings, workshop lesson plans, share feedback on book reviews, and more. The idea is that these fellows will, on completion of their fellowship, become ambassadors for climate literacy in their schools and districts, mentoring other cohorts of teachers in doing the same. And importantly, these folks are getting paid for this, thanks to a generous donation from the late Dr. Pete Palmer. And here's what the fellows had to say about their work.
Hi, I'm Luke Glidden.
Hi, I'm Dong Mei.
Hi, my name is Abby Hartzell.
嗨，你好，大家好，我是 Joseph Lin。
My name is Zach Johnson.
I'm teaching 9th, 10th, 11th grade math at Lila Lakes International Language Academy.
I teach Chinese in St. Paul Public School.
I'm a botany and introduction to education teacher at Columbia Heights High School.
I'm a science educator with Anoka Hennepin School District.
I'm a 9th grade English teacher at Fridley High School. I'm part of the first cohort of Climate Literacy Fellows.
And I'm the first cohort of Climate Lit's Fellowship.
And I'm a fellow in the Center for Climate Literacy's Teacher Fellowship Program this year.
I'm excited to be a member of the first cohort of the Climate Literacy Teachers Program.
As a science teacher, I understand how paramount it is for students to have an understanding of how the climate crisis is going to affect their future.
他们现在正在学关于中国沿海地区的这种气候变迁。
The reason I'm teaching Climate Lit in the math classroom is because I like to have my kids to come up with a better and creative solutions to deal with climate change.
I think it's really important to teach climate literacy in the English classroom because climate change is often seen from a scientific perspective with numbers, but when you bring it into an English classroom, you see it as a human social problem.
The science of climate change is pretty straightforward. More heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere trap more heat. And that's where a lot of climate education starts and stops, without grappling with the societal drivers that enable that climate change.
If we are to solve climate change, we need to understand it from the perspective of stories. And when students learn about climate change through stories, they build connections with the natural world.
Our brains run on stories and symbols and glucose.
So rather than solely relying on data, I'm hoping to help them to come up with a more like critical ideas on how to read data.
My students are designing lessons based on how to have difficult conversations with people that might not necessarily believe in climate change.
My students are learning the impact of climate change on China's sea.
If we are to teach students about climate change through stories, they're going to build connections with the natural world. Ultimately, this inspires them to take action and to see themselves as part of a greater ecological community.
Teaching climate literacy help us develop a good global citizens and create a better planet for us all, and even more importantly, for future generations.
We are the Teacher Fellows.
Those fellows are fantastic, and I'm really grateful for them and their participation in the program. I'm also super grateful for the undergraduates that we're working with this year. This marked our first year of our first cohort of undergraduate interns, and these folks are serving on right now a largely volunteer basis and do an incredible number of things like help us write and edit book reviews, organize and facilitate events, draft marketing materials, design web pages, and a whole lot more. They come from majors that range from neuroscience to philosophy to business to linguistics, and they are key in helping this work actually work. They also have a video up that introduces themselves, which you can access on the center's webpage. So now we've told you a little bit about who we are, the work we do, and the need for this work. But we also want to show you what exactly this work entails or what it looks like in action. And to do so, I want to start by reading you a story. The story I want to read you is a book called The Fate of Fausto by Oliver Jeffers. And as I read it, I'll put on my teacher hat and ask you to think about, as I read, why this book might be helpful in sparking learning about the climate crisis. All right, enjoy, folks. There was once a man who believed he owned everything and set out to survey what was his. "You are mine," said Fausto to the flower. "Yes," said the flower, "I am yours." Content, Fausto walked on. "You are mine," he said to the sheep. "Yes," said the sheep, "I suppose I am." Feeling satisfied, Fausto walked on. Next, Fausto came upon a tree and declared, "Tree, you are mine." To which the tree replied, "Oh, all right, I can be yours." And the tree bowed before the man. This pleased Fausto, and he walked on, happy to be owning a sheep and a flower and his tree. Before long, Fausto had claimed a field and a forest and a lake. But at first, the lake had pretended not to hear. But Fausto showed that lake who was boss. When he reached a mountain, Fausto said in a clear voice, "Mountain, you are mine." "No," said the mountain, "I am my own." This angered Fausto, and he stamped his foot and he made a fist. But still, the mountain would not move. But Fausto put up such a fight you would not believe and showed the mountain who was boss. Eventually, the mountain bowed before Fausto and said, "Yes, you are in charge. I am yours." Feeling very important, Fausto easily conquered a boat to set off to sea. For a mountain, a lake, a forest, a field, a tree, a sheep, and a flower were not enough for him. When he had gotten far enough from shore, Fausto said in a loud voice, "See, you are mine." But the sea was silent. "You belong to me, sea. I know you can hear me," said Fausto, louder still. Then, after a while, the sea said quietly, "You do not own me." "You are wrong. I do," Fausto replied, unsure which way to look, for the voice appeared to come from everywhere. "But you do not even love me," said the sea. "You are wrong again," said the man. "I love you very much." But Fausto was lying, and the sea knew it. "How can you love me when you do not understand me?" the sea asked Fausto. "You are wrong a third time," said Fausto. "I understand you deeply." Then he added, feeling impatient, "Now admit you are mine, or I will show you who is boss." "And how will you do that?" asked the sea. "Well, I will stamp my foot and make a fist." "Well, if you wish to stamp your foot, then come show me how it is done, so I understand." And in order to show his anger and importance, Fausto climbed overboard to stamp his foot on the sea. But he did not understand. And he did not know how to swim. The sea was sad for him, but carried on being the sea. The mountain, too, went back to its business. And the lake and the forest, the field and the tree and the sheep and the flower carried on as before. For the fate of Fausto did not matter to them. That was The Fate of Fausto by Oliver Jeffers. And why do I like a book such as this as a climate literacy teaching tool? Well, as an allegory, it offers teachers several openings for considering the ideological underpinnings of the Anthropocene, or the geological era that we are in now. Ideological underpinnings like the human supremacy complex, denial of the rights of nature, human ownership claims over the world. Because in Fausto's hubris, in his pursuit of ever greater power over the world and his inability to care for non-human nature, Fausto embodies the failures of anthropocentrism, which is the belief that humans are central to and above all other nature. Fausto wants to be the boss, and he can't hear nature telling him no. The sea, for example, points out that Fausto doesn't understand or love it. Yet when Fausto convinces himself that he does, it's to his end. Fausto's conquests embody the Anthropocene. The narrative begins not with a human living as a natural being, but rather as Fausto believing he owns everything and setting out to survey what was his. So in this way, the story also demonstrates a key aspect of the Anthropocene, that exploitation leads to more exploitation, which in turn leads to conflict. I believe this is a story that can be read with all ages, and teachers can pose grade level specific questions to students or let students identify these concepts on their own as they listen along. But Climate literacy doesn't need to just happen with words and images on a page, but it can happen with texts of all modalities, as Merrick will explain. Merrick?
Understanding that we live in the Anthropocene, that this clip can be used even with small children to spark discussions about the world's aliveness, about ecocentric attitudes. Children will notice immediately that something is going on, that the forest is alive, and that Olaf is not welcome there. They will laugh at how he denies the evidence, assuring himself that these weird things are normal, which the children will know are not normal. And on this level, the short clip can also be a conversation starter about climate denial, why some people refuse to see the evidence, even when it's staring them in the eye. We're now moving to the last but one section of this town hall, how you can help. And let me start with a few numbers. 90, 30, and 13. These three numbers reflect how quickly we're heating the planet. It took us about 90 years, anywhere between 140 and 90 years, to heat up the planet by ½ degrees Celsius. Then it took us only 30 years, from the late 1980s through the 2020, to double carbon dioxide again and double global warming to about 1 degree Celsius. We're now at 1.1 Celsius, and models show that we'll dip into 1.5 degrees Celsius warming by the early 2030s. Scientists agree that 1.5 degrees Celsius warming is the threshold under which our global industrial civilization can survive. Crossing this threshold puts us on thin ice, and at 2 degrees Celsius warming introduces the level of disasters the human species have not seen yet. These numbers mean that we don't have decades to act. We must do everything we can now. It's time for climate literacy education now, this decade. 4, 6, and 69. These numbers are some of the numbers that show how bad the planetary situation is. Scientists have identified 9 planetary boundaries and 15 climate tipping points, whose triggering starts an unstoppable collapse. Over the past 3 decades, we have crossed 4 planetary boundaries, and 6 tipping points are now likely to happen in the near future. In the meantime, we have also managed to kill off 69% of wildlife populations worldwide. Combined, this is a death threat to us all, to our children, to our world. We should fight this destruction like our lives depend on it, which they do. Next numbers, 27 and 54. 27 refers to the number of United Nations Climate Change Summits, or COPs, that we've had, and these COPs have changed almost nothing. 54 is the percentage by which human-caused greenhouse gas emissions have risen since 1990. We have waited for a systemic change to trickle down from above for about 30 years. No more. Our best chance is a change from below, a change that is massive, systemic, and empowers ordinary people to be agents of transformation. This change must start with education. In the next slide, let's look at education. 84, 86, and 1. 84 and 86 is the percentages of American parents and teachers who support teaching about climate change in schools. There are no studies yet on how many schools offer climate education, but our estimate is that it's 1% or less. Given the world in which we live, can we really afford an education system that pay less than 1% attention to the key existential threat of our time? We don't think so. 10 and 1 and 99 and 1. These are the proportions in funding. The first number includes a total of global fossil fuel subsidies, just the subsidies, direct and indirect, of $5.9 trillion in 2022, according to IMF, compared to a mere $632 million the world spent on global climate action. So we're funding our destruction. The other two numbers reflect the distribution of funding for climate-related research between 1990 and 2018. 99.88% of this funding went to the natural and technical sciences. Only 0.12% was used to support climate-focused research related to the change of attitudes, values, norms, and behaviors, a change that has long been recognized as central to any effective climate policy in action. So the point here is we have to stop funding our own destruction. And two, we have to stop misallocating fund. We need to invest in climate literacy education. On this urgency of funding, I quoted these numbers to give you the context for how urgent this work is, how little has been done, and how we need to step up funding for climate literacy education while we still have a livable planet to protect. This urgency is central to the most recent IPCC report, which came out in March, on the 20th of March this year. And this is a quote from this report. The systemic change required to achieve rapid and deep emission reductions and transformative adaptation to climate change is unprecedented in terms of scale, and near-term actions involve high upfront investments. The funding urgency is also understood by a growing number of philanthropists. At the center, we have staff who are ready to do this work full-time, but we need sustainable funding that allows us to plan ahead, expand, and reach all teachers. In 2020, Ellen Dorsey, Executive Director of the Wallace Global Fund, published a talk with the title, Philanthropy Must Declare a Climate Emergency. In it, she calls for a radical spend down of assets to ensure we preserve a livable planet. And this is a quote that you see here. We need to sharply expand how much we spend to fight climate change. We will need to provide sufficient resources so that movements have the scale to confront inaction, which requires a different approach than simply funding traditional nonprofits. At the Center for Climate Literacy, we have the expertise and capacities to transform the entire education system from within. The vast majority of work we've done so far has been volunteer hours. This work has now reached levels of intensity that are impossible to continue unless people are paid for their time and develop these projects. We need funding for core operations. We need funding for that journal. We need funding for expanding the Climate Lit Resource Hub. We need funding for workshops, summer schools, professional development, and reaching teachers. We need to pay experts, designers, instructors, teachers, and student staff. Especially, we need to pay teachers to attend professional development sessions and then support these teachers in their classrooms and schools. Please join us in this fight for everyone's future. Imagine what we can achieve together if we invest in climate literacy education for a greener, equitable, and sustainable world.
So Merrick shared with you some numbers that underscore the need for work like this. And I want to share with you some numbers that show how this work can be done to the extent that it must be done. Based on the relationships and materials that we at the center already have right now, we could support annual work that includes, at minimum, 6 3-day professional development workshops that would train 120 teachers, 2 10-week online courses that would train 60 teachers, 3 2-week summer institutes to train 90 teachers. We could support 12 teacher fellows for an entire academic year. And this would also support the annual operation of the journal, Climate Lit, and our other core operations as Merrick just described. Again, this is what we could do right now with the infrastructure and personnel we have right now on a budget of right around $1 million. But right now, we have no funding. But of the work we've just described, we have 3 especially important and urgent needs that I want to articulate in a little more detail. The first is the support for teacher fellows. This program is a cornerstone of our work, and it's central to our vision of creating a ripple effect with climate literacy education. We know that we ourselves at the center will never be able to support the 50,000 Minnesotan teachers and nearly 5 million teachers nationwide. But by training folks to become trainers, as we are doing with the Teacher Fellow program, we can reach every student in every classroom. And these folks must be paid for their time. Our second priority is support for teacher workshops. This program allows educators who want to do this work a way to get involved without needing to commit to a full year as a fellow. And these workshops allow teachers from outside the metro area to participate in them. These workshops are key to generating materials for individual teachers who participate, yes, but also these materials are also shared through our venues so that all teachers benefit from them. So at about $1,100 per participant, in addition to supporting teachers through stipends and paid continuing education credits, we generate at minimum one lesson plan and one book review for our open access collections per teacher at minimum. But more importantly, the communities of support that develop from these workshops are invaluable. Last, we need support for our core operations, including things like outreach, media, IT, marketing, and administration. Right now, all of the work that's been described in this town hall has been done by and large on a volunteer basis. That's on top of our teaching, advisory, administration, and service commitments, which are full-time. Imagine what we could do with a cadre of folks who can devote their full attention and their full energy to this. This work is essential, it's existential, and it will require all of us in all of our capacities with all the efforts, care, and attention that we can give. And we're grateful to you all for being here with us this afternoon and for sharing with us your time and attention. And we want to recognize that and reciprocate it by turning now to discussing some of the questions that you might have about our work. And Merrick and I will start by addressing the questions that came in through the registration form, and we'll answer as many additional questions as time allows. And so as Merrick and I address the questions we've already received, email us your questions at climatelit@umn.edu. But first, the questions that we've already received. And Merrick, one of the first questions we received was about how to get schools to participate. This attendee asked, I would like my children's schools to participate. How can we get our local schools involved?
Thank you. So we can be reached online. We have a website, we have a contact form, and email is probably the best way to get involved with us. We do not yet have the human capacity to get involved with the entire school in terms of training all teachers in a given school. But if we have one teacher or two teachers in a school who wants to work with us, who's interested to do climate literacy in whatever subject area they teach, on whatever grade level, let them reach out to us. We will follow up and we will figure something out. So we do not have, we're now working with 5 teachers and they are each ambassadors for climate literacy in their schools. And we know from these teachers that other teachers are interested in the work they're doing and the resources they use. And these lesson plans, these materials need to be always tailored to specific needs. You work very differently in a math class, middle grade, versus in a chemistry or Chinese immersion class that is high school. So teachers will know what to use, what will work with their audiences. That's why we need to work with teachers specifically.
And thinking about partnerships, question number 2 asks, is it possible that this work could also be adapted and created for educational organizations like libraries and after-school programs?
Yes, absolutely. We have already been doing this with third age audiences. We've had 2 workshop sessions with third age audiences, so grandparents who can do climate literacy work with their grandkids in their communities, in their families. So of course, yes, absolutely. Our primary target is K through 12 education systems because this is the most massive system. But of course, pretty much all of the resources we develop, lesson plans, activities, all of this can be adapted by libraries, after-school programs. Yes, yes, yes.
And on that note about adaptation, the third question asks about differentiating the programming and making it inclusive. So the question asks, how do we simplify information on climate change for elementary schools and high schools? And additionally, how can we engage the diverse community in the Twin Cities on climate change? And I might extend that question to diverse communities writ large.
Yeah, absolutely. This needs to be done. That's why this work is dispersed. I don't know if the word simplify information on climate change is relevant. Our sense from working with teachers and students is that young people often understand far more about these processes that drive the climate emergency than adults are willing to admit to themselves or willing to learn. So, but yes, this whole process needs to be scaffolded. This whole process needs to be teacher-led. When teachers take ownership of this work, teachers will figure out the way, what they need for their students in their specific grade levels, for their specific courses that they teach, what kind of entry points to discussions about the climate emergency would work best. And then when teachers develop these resources, we will publish them, we will make them available to other teachers. So the more resources we create, the more lesson plans, the more activity happens in schools, the more of it is available to other teachers to more easily adopt. And of course, this also includes engaging with diverse communities. Climate literacy teaching will be different in Arizona. It will be different in Florida. It will be different in the Midwest. It will be different in different states, even for rural schools versus urban schools. This will always need to be different because we need to be mindful of the needs of local diverse communities. So all of this can be created. It will not be one size fits all. It will need to be dispersed, but it's all eminently doable. It's only a question of how many people will be involved, and these people will need to be paid for this work because it's at this point, it is on top of their regular professional responsibilities as teachers, as principals, as school districts, and whatever.
And Marek, we've had a question come in from email that I'd like to address now, and then we can return to some of the questions that came in through registration. One of the attendees right now asks, if I have $100 to donate to this effort, what are your recommendations for dividing my donation between your program and something like the Wallace Global Fund? I want the most impact from my contribution.
Thank you. That's a great question. I am biased, of course. I would say, please donate $100 to us. Wallace Global Fund operates with millions of dollars, maybe hundreds of millions. I don't think your $100 will make a difference to them. It will make a difference to us. So that's my bias. But I believe that the work we can do, it can be far more impactful because it's a work that is focused on transforming a very specific, large system of our civilization called public education. We really can do this. No external organization can do this, but we are a teacher education institution. We have contacts in other teacher education institutions across the country and overseas. So if climate literacy becomes a component of teacher training everywhere, when teachers go to their schools and they start incorporating climate literacy in whatever subject areas they teach, this is where the real impact happens. And we believe in the change that this can bring.
This is a timely question and a timely response, because we got another question that asks, how and where can I donate to support this work? I can tell you that right now. You can donate on our website, on the center website, that's climateliteracy.umn.edu, and you'll see a link that says make a gift, and then there'll be a series of links that you can follow to get there. But we'll also include that in our follow-up email after this town hall. We've got another couple of questions that have come in through email, so we'll address those before we turn back to the ones we've already received. One question asks, and also frames their question as follows: economic growth is at the heart of our existing economic model, yet 6 gigantic economic sectors, private, public, nonprofit, cooperative, sharing economy, social impact investing, have not solved a single social, economic, or environmental problem. Who in economics do you have that is interested in a new economics not based on growth, not just green values, but zero growth economics?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. This is a massive discussion happening mostly among specialists. Nate Higgins comes to mind, Simon Michaud talking about minerals, Kate Raworth with donut economics, There is a number of people who are experts in the fields of finance, energy, food. These are separate systems that are part of a larger whole, and yet each of these systems has its own very specific challenges. So this is a very technical discussion, and this discussion is happening among these experts in these fields. So we are not part of this discussion, but what we can do, the way that we cannot talk about minerals, like global production of minerals and how many minerals we need, what kinds of minerals for this transformation. We really don't know, but we know about what we can do in the system called education. So and there are stories that talk about, for example, the classic Lorax and the and a number of even early works from the 1970s. They clearly, these works for children, films and books, they identify growth as this primary driver, growth at any cost, short-term growth that forget what happens in 20, 50 years time. They clearly identify growth as a problem, as a threat, but these authors like Dr. Seuss, they didn't have any solutions. They thought, okay, it's really bad, but we are doomed to grow. That's the only way we can be. Now, 30 or 50 years later, we know that it's not the only way to be, that there are very different ways, especially indigenous ways of being, indigenous value systems, and circular economies. And there is a ton of really amazing work being done about this. But of course, the mainstream system of our civilization is still a growth-addicted, greedy, all-consuming machine. This machine needs to be stopped. And we believe part of the stopping happens in schools.
Marek, we've got a two-part question that might be answered in one response, and I'll read it in full. The questions go as follows. How do you make sure you aren't reinventing the wheel? There are, for example, many community-based organizations and funding agencies like NOAA's climate program that are integrating place-based climate education into schools and communities. And on that note, the second question, how are you working with environmental justice and tribal communities to ensure local context is offered, especially because indigenous communities have been living sustainably for time immemorial?
Yes, excellent questions. About we're not reinventing the wheel. We know we're experts in education, and we know that education has pretty much neglected climate literacy completely. This shows in professional conferences, professional organizations, in education, how many curricula at university level include climate literacy. It's almost non-existent. So we can do the work in our very specific field and discipline. NOAA is fantastic. The work they do is absolutely brilliant, except that NOAA and most other organizations, NOAA came up with this concept called climate literacy, but they treat it as a synonym for climate science literacy. For NOAA, just as well as for the new generation science standards, which were published, first released in 2013, I believe, climate literacy is a very narrow band of subfield in science. It's only about numbers. It's only about scientific knowledge, and it's very limited. It's a thin slice that students in grade 6, 9, and 12 have to learn a couple of things that you pretty much spend 1 hour a year to learn. That's about it. These are the standards. So since NOAA came up with this notion of climate science literacy, it was, I believe, in 2008 and then published in 2010. We've gone a long way, and we have a ton of research in social sciences that shows that, yes, climate science is important, but it will never, never be enough. If you're chased by a tiger, how fast should you run? You should run faster. That's the only speed that is relevant, faster. Climate science does not get us to the faster speed. Climate literacy, this broad social, scientific, cultural competence, that is the fuel we need. So that's the first question. What was the other?
The second part of that question was, how are you working with environmental justice and tribal communities to ensure local context is offered, especially because Indigenous folks have been living sustainably since time immemorial?
Yes, absolutely. We have not done much yet because of our limited capacity, where our group is quite limited, and we've been doing 3 jobs, every single one of us, trying to stay on top of the things we can actually do. We are working on partnerships with local communities, and we have people who have done work with. So one of our fellows has done work with local educators in Ecuador. So of course we want to use the structures, methods, and ways of thinking developed by indigenous communities. We haven't gotten that much of this work done yet. Please remember, we've been around only for a year, less than a year as the center. We're doing everything we can. And this is definitely something that we want to do far more, provided we have the resources to do it.
Yeah, and I'm conscious of the time. We've got about 7 minutes left for questions, and we really appreciate the questions that have come in. So please continue to send them our way. Another question that came in, Merrick asks this: who in the University of Minnesota administration has supported the Center for Climate Literacy, including allowing you to use the Use brand to fundraise?
The Dean of the College of Education and Human Development, Dean Rodriguez, and this entire session is created in and supported by University Foundation, which I understand is this highest level university-wide foundation that works with partners, donors, sponsors. So this is not any kind of private initiative of 2 crazy guys. We have the full support of the University of Minnesota for this initiative.
Speaking of being in partnership and in community, another question that came in through our email asks, what do you think about the term symbiotic society instead of ecological society? A symbiotic society, or one that is based on mutual assistance, cooperation between people and nature, works very similarly to nature.
Yes, I think it's a great term. I think Jeremy Lent uses this concept, and a couple of other scholars. So it's a great concept. I do not have any specific answer on how much better it is than an ecological civilization. I do know from the scholarship that I'm familiar with that an ecological civilization is probably the most often used term for the kind of world we want to create, the world where humans and the non-human nature is in balance, and then we are able to thrive without destroying our home. I don't know if this answers the question, but definitely mutual assistance, cooperation between people and nature. This is, but it takes learning. Like, how do we cooperate with nature? Like, if you need to commute, if you need to take a car, like, on what level are you cooperating with nature, or on what level you are going against nature? So these are really complicated questions, and all of these questions need unpacking. They need time to think about, and all of this climate literacy that we advocate for is to really create space for meaningful conversations in classrooms where students learn concepts, they learn terms, they learn, pretty much everyone is familiar with emissions, maybe with carbon budget, maybe with with climate change, and a couple of other general terms that allow us to even talk about these things or to think about these things. But the discussion around these issues is massive and spans a number of fields where specialists in these fields, they describe processes and they come up with very specific tags and designators like slow violence, designator like keystone species, trophic resonance, and so forth. So climate literacy involves learning these things through stories. And then when children, so climate denial, a child that watches and has an opportunity to discuss the clip that we showed earlier, like with Olaf dancing and singing, everything gets simpler when you get, when you're older. a child will have an anchor, conceptual anchor, to connect the notion of climate denial, climate change denial, to this specific clip. So we need, stories are these ways to help us remember, conceptualize this extremely complex challenge, or aspects of this extremely complex challenge that we face. We need these discussions, and that's what climate literacy is all about.
Merrick, we have time for one more question. And the question I want to ask is this: how do you encourage people to stay motivated in doing this work rather than taking one action and bowing out?
This thinking is the heart of what we're proposing to do. Once we start working with the teacher takes, let's say, even this one-year fellowship with us, the teacher becomes our ambassador, the teacher becomes mentor to other teachers, the teacher gets involved, and is whatever their capacity and time, we pay for this time and this capacity, and this teacher becomes one of our instructors, becomes an ambassador, a trainer for their local school, for the local district. So this is the way that this entire work is designed from the get-go. We don't do one-time actions. It's not productive. We want to train a cadre of people and create this hub of resources that continues to grow, where people share what they do, how to do it. And then these people add to resources so that other teachers can be involved. So this project, this whole idea of transforming education will succeed only when it's massive. If we transform 2 or 5 schools, it's not the impact we're looking for. We want this impact to be felt everywhere, in every kindergarten, every school, everywhere.
Thank you, Merrick. And thank you again, everyone, for spending your afternoon with us. We're grateful for it. And you can be watching your inboxes for a follow-up email about this town hall, including this, which will have materials, including this recording, our slides, our annotated bibliography, and more. If you would like to ask further questions or connect with us, you can reach out to us via email at climatelit@umn.edu. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you.
Thank you.